When we said that we were going to be nuclear free, it was relatively easy because we didn't have a whole lot of nuclear energy. It was basically draw a line around, tell the Americans to buzz off with the occasional once every 8-year visit of a nuclear ship, and that is far more simple than what is required about New Zealand becoming carbon free. We were pretty cynical and remain pretty cynical of the previous government stance of New Zealand being the first carbon neutral country in the world. At the same time, our emissions went up by 21% during those 9 years. We would rather set realistic targets, and that's why we've set that long-term target of -50 by 2050. And also our view is that when New Zealand is but 0.2% of global emissions, and you are a very internationally focused economy, you need to be very careful that you don't simply export emissions to other countries. We don't manufacture steel, but we import it from overseas. We don't manufacture aluminium, but we export those industries offshore. And so I think the issue around climate change is a whole lot more challenging in getting our carbon emissions down than the declaration of being nuclear free.
My answer is slightly different to that. It depends whether, when you say carbon free, that includes methane and nitrous oxide. Because if it does, then with respect, I think that's unrealistic. Because I can't see how we can eliminate those emissions from animal production. And to be frank, I don't think the world expects us to. If you were to narrow it and say fossil fuel carbon emissions free, well, you've seen that we want to achieve carbon neutrality in the energy sector by 2040.
I speak with some feeling. I did my PhD on nuclear weapon-free zones, and I was on the delegation when we negotiated the South Pacific Zone, and I can assure Nick that it was not easy. Having said that, I don't think it follows causally that we have to be a leader on climate change. What I do think we have to do, and it is totally sufficient, is simply respond rationally to the global threat that is, it's not even coming down the track, it's right on our doorstep, and see what and as I mentioned or about to mention, see what the global emissions are, what the requirement for cut in global emissions are, deduce from that what our responsibility for cuts in national emissions are. And it isn't a question, I mean, we can argue the toss on realism. Realism requires us to identify the magnitude and imminence of the problem and act rationally in response. So that we identify what national cuts are, and we don't say it's not realistic, we say we're going to do it. End of story.
My personal view is that the main two political parties in New Zealand are closer on this than I think in probably any other developed country. That is, there is a difference between Labour and National on pace. That's true. Labour is wanting to bring agriculture in more quickly. We have wanted to go more slowly. But there isn't disagreement about the fact that agriculture should be in the scheme and that it should be a all gases type scheme. So do I think, I actually tried quite hard to get agreement with Labour. I'll say this in David Parker's presence because I mean it genuinely. My view is that if the discussions had been between myself and David, I think we probably would have got there. We actually got quite close. Even today, you've got principled agreement around the design of the ETS, around the industrial allocations, of which long-term investment decisions is very important. You effectively have National and Labour on the same page. The key area of difference is with agriculture. I have to be fair, and it's not to be in any way disagreement with Kennedy, but if you want to take my personal view of Parliament, I've sort of got the Green Party at one end that's only interested in the environment, that's fair enough. I find the ACT Party at the other end, they're only interested in the economy, and the big parties in the middle are actually trying to deal with these very difficult dilemmas and how you try and find a balanced way forward.
You described the Greens, in a sense you're describing the kind of knee-jerk philosophical interpretation of Parliament, which is inaccurate. Within that gradation, there's a qualitative difference that is philosophically paradigmatic between the Green Party and the other parties. And I see it day after day after day in Parliament, where the numerical balance is usually out of the 122 and the 49th Parliament just finished. We're 64 to 58. The philosophical balance was 122 to 9. Because we adopt ecological economics that does not have the economy on the one hand and balancing, as the Prime Minister has unctuously uttered the mantra for the last 3 years. Economy, balancing your economic opportunity with your environmental responsibilities, and gee, aren't we responsible? It is holistically one and the same thing. If you don't have your environment, you don't have your economy. So that is what galvanises us into these greater sense of urgency.
I actually think we are, pretty fortunate in New Zealand that we have some agreement in respect of those core features. But hell, disagreement around agriculture is huge. It still seems to be on the never-never, because when I'm at other audiences, I hear Nick Smith saying, we haven't yet made up our mind when agriculture's coming in.
Well, that's not indifferent from saying there are 2 key tests that have to be met before agriculture comes in.
So it's on the never-never still. Whereas, you'll hear from us, it's 1 January 2013 and they pay for all of their increases, and that preserves that price signal which makes the emissions trading scheme work. That is a fundamental difference, an absolutely fundamental difference, and it covers half of our emissions.